extinction. And with your help, we can take action to save some of the charming, fierce, wonderful creatures, one photo at a time. See what we can save together. The world is full of fascinating, curious, beautiful creatures that keep our planet diverse and healthy. But these species are disappearing at an alarming rate in the wild. National Geographic and photographer Joel Sartori are building an ark, photographing every species in captivity, including those at risk of extinction. And with your help, we can take action to save some of the charming, fierce, wonderful creatures, one photo at a time. See what we can save together.
Hi everyone, we'll get started shortly. Thank you for joining.
Our world is full of fascinating, curious, beautiful creatures that keep our planet diverse and healthy. But these species are disappearing at an alarming rate in the wild. National Geographic and photographer Joel Sartori are building an ark, photographing every species in captivity, including those at risk of extinction. And with your help, we can take action to save some of the charming, fierce, wonderful creatures, one photo at a time. See what we can save together. Our world is full of fascinating, curious, beautiful creatures that keep our planet diverse and healthy. But these species are disappearing at an alarming rate in the wild. National Geographic and photographer Joel Sartori are building an ark, photographing every species in captivity, including those at risk of extinction. And with your help, we can take action to save some of the charming, fierce, wonderful creatures, one photo at a time. See what we can save together.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. I'm glad to see so many people who are joining us today from all over the world. We'll just wait for more people to join. Greetings from Romania, I see someone saying, thank you. Greetings, everyone. Greetings from Zambia. Great. Glad to see so many familiar faces. Some of you who joined us the last time with Project Exploration 1.0, as I like to call it. So thank you for returning back. And good afternoon, students and teachers joining me today. And depending on where you are, good morning. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm DaVida Alston, and I will be your teacher for today's lesson. So I'm excited because today we're going to be learning about ecosystems, endangered species, and conservation. And so by at the end of the lesson, you will become a true animal superhero. That's our theme for today as we explore ways to save our endangered species from around the world, okay? So let's get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Let's just make sure everyone can hear me. I see someone saying that they can't hear me. I just want to make sure that you can hear me. Okay, great job. Good job. Okay, great job, everyone. So students, I just want to go over a few things with you. Since you're joining me today from Zoom webinar or the YouTube link, just a few things. Your cameras and mics have been turned off for today's lesson, but we do want you to engage with us today, okay? So make sure that you're using the chat feature and you can answer questions and ask questions in the chat feature. If you would like to send us direct messages, you can also engage with us through the Q&A. And then I may ask you a question and you can just raise your hand to answer the questions, okay? So that's how you'll engage with me today. And our lesson will be about 30 to 40 minutes. We want to give you time to ask questions at the end. Okay, so great. Let's get started, guys. So I want to talk about our learning objectives for today's lesson. And we want you to think like a scientist. I want you to think, put on your thinking caps, think like a scientist as we explore conservation and endangered species around the planet, okay? So our 3 learning objectives are defining new words, to develop a better understanding of ecosystems. Our second learning objective is to explain and discuss the various elements. So what I mean is, what are some various elements that make up ecosystems? So we'll learn that today. And then we're also going to explore animals in different ecosystems, which are becoming endangered species, okay? So I asked your teachers to remind you to do a few things for me. One was to bring a science notebook. And this is how you're going to engage with me. And we're going to call this our interactive science notebook. So if you have a notebook handy, please pull it out and then have your notebook ready so you can write down information as we learn together today. Because we're going to critically think about analyzing ecosystems. We're going to analyze environmental issues that are causing animals to be endangered. And we're going to use our interactive notebook to support our learning, okay? So pull out your notebook if you have one readily available, or if you just have a piece of paper. And let's write down our key vocabulary words for today to help us with our learning, okay? So our vocabulary words are ecosystem, species, individual, population, and community. So these are going to be our key words to help us to have a better understanding of exactly what is an ecosystem. We're also going to learn 2 new words, endangered species, really understand what does it mean to be an endangered species or as animals are becoming extinct across the world. And then we're also going to talk about conservation and what it means to be a conservationist. And we're so lucky today. We're going to be joined by National Geographic Explorer, who's a conservationist, okay? So let's use some of our thinking skills. I want everyone to take a moment and I want you to visualize your environment where you live, okay? So your environment, which is the ecosystem where you live. And I want you to think about the organisms you see in your environment, so plants, the animals. And by doing that in your notebook, I want you to draw a picture, or you can create a web diagram using words and phrases which represent the environment you live in. So in other words, what are some of the animals you see in your natural environment, or the plants that you see? All of those things that help to make up your ecosystem. So I'm going to give everyone a minute just to jot down some ideas in their scientific notebook, and I'm going to also set my timer. So let's get going, guys. Visualize what you see in your natural environment. And as you're doing that, if you would also like to put in the chat, what do you see in your environment? Because I want to know where you live. Where are you joining me from around the world, and what does your ecosystem look like? Okay, what are some of those natural and those living organisms in your environment? Okay, so let's get started, guys. Jot down some ideas in your notebook. Oh, someone said they're from the UAE, and that's where I currently live, so thank you for that. So I'm going to talk about my environment too. I'm visualizing now the living organisms that I see in the UAE, so thank you. All right. Let's see. Anyone else can share what they see in their environment? Someone put cats, roses, birds, trees. Great. Great job, guys. Thank you. Ants in your natural environment. Thank you. And I'm just going to show you guys to help you. As I just said, I currently live in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, and this is what I see in my environment. I live in the desert. So I see things like camels and the falcon, okay? And then the plants that are naturally grow in my environment, the cactus. So here's some things that I see in my environment where I currently live. And so if I was thinking of words to help me, I would say that my environment is extremely dry environment, that animals and plants within the ecosystem survive in this environment by adapting. So they have to adapt to be able to survive in this dry and hot environment that I live in, okay? And I see some other students in the chat. Let me see what you guys are saying. Okay, so, ooh, in the UAE here, it's somewhat windy in the night, but it's very sunny in the morning. Very good. And Bianca said a camel, thank you. And someone said they're in Nepal, so tell me what you see in your environment in Nepal. Great job participating, guys. Sand, someone said. Yeah, lions, scorpions, and elephants. Very good, from the American International School. Great job, guys. So I'm loving to hear what you see in your environment, those organisms, those living organisms, and this is what I see in mine. But you know what? As you guys are writing and thinking in your creative notebooks, I'm actually going to play a video to explain a little bit more about ecosystems and what are ecosystems. So as you're writing, just listen to our short video clip. Okay, guys, let's get started.
Think about the foods you eat: meat, vegetables, and fruits. Why do you eat them? To get energy and nutrients. Other living things need energy and nutrients too. Organisms such as plants and animals that live in the same area depend on each other to meet their needs. Groups of organisms living in the same area are part of an ecosystem. How are organisms in an ecosystem related?
So let's think about that. How are organisms in an ecosystem related? And what did we learn from the video about ecosystems? You can tell me in the chat. What did we learn about ecosystems from the video? Let's see. Okay, trees, the ocean is very windy today. Someone else is still talking about their environment. What did we learn about ecosystems? One of the things that I heard were organisms living together are all a part of what makes an ecosystem. Okay, I heard that from the video. Ooh, someone said they're interdependent. I love it. Hybrid animals. Good job, guys. Well, let's just use some of our literacy skills, and we're just going to skim this page. We're not going to read everything, but this is an example of an ecosystem. It's a tall grass prairie ecosystem. Now, I said I currently live in Dubai, but I grew up in the United States, and this was a part of my environment. I lived in the tall grass prairie ecosystem, and I would see some of this, the grass and the trees, and some of these animals that naturally live in this environment, okay? And let's just skim on the side, and I'm just going to circle where I want everyone to look. I'm gonna highlight here, and let's just look and see. It says that an ecosystem is all the living and non-living things that interact in an area. And a healthy ecosystem is one in which types of animals and living things are able to meet their needs. I want you to think about that for a second while I just share some pictures with you, okay? So think about that definition, and I just want to show you some of the things that naturally are in this tall grass prairie ecosystem. So let's look at some of the pictures. This is the horned larks, and they live in the tall grass prairie. And just look at their natural environment and look at some of the things that you see in the environment. And I love this, these burrowing owls, and they live in a nest dug in the soul of the prairie. Very cool. But one of my favorite, when I was a child, what I would see are the deer. So this is one of my favorites. So you see how the deer graze in the grass and how they interact within this ecosystem. So these are just some of the things that you would see in this ecosystem. And I want you to think about things that you see in your normal environment, okay? But one of the things it said, it talked about how they all interact together, okay? And I want to talk about this. So how it interacts together. So it said the horned lark and the deer all live and interact in the ecosystem to meet their basic needs, okay? And so let's look at this. And species all live together, and there are three things that they develop this ecosystem. There's a community, the population, and an individual. So let's learn about each one of them. So an individual in the ecosystem is just a single organism. So let's look at this picture. It's the prairie dog. It's just one individual in this ecosystem. But then when you put a group of prairie dogs together, they make up a population. So a group of prairie dogs together, they make up the population. But then once we add more animals into the ecosystem, it becomes a community. So you see the bison in here and the prairie dogs. And then if you think about everything in the environment, the plants, the animals, all of those and how they interact together, they all make up an ecosystem. But there's something for us to think about. One of our vocabulary words was endangered species, which means that they're disappearing. Animals are disappearing or they're becoming extinct. And the last paragraph on this page that says, healthy communities have many species connected by a variety of food webs, and that they live and survive by interacting when their needs are met. So often these groups, the individuals, the populations, the community that forms this ecosystem, there are things that happen that their needs are not being met. And that's why they're becoming endangered. So let's look at this picture. These are just different animals from around the world that are becoming endangered. And there's some various reasons why. We're going to talk about that. But look at some of these pictures, the panda, the polar bear, different birds. We're going to find out what those factors are, okay? So let's look at this, some important factors that are making different species in the ecosystems to become endangered. What are humans? It's us. And let's talk about why. So population growth. Raise your hand if you live in a large city where there's loads and lots of people. Raise your hand if you live in a big city, okay? And I see some people raising their hand. Yeah, so population growth. Often when our communities are growing and the population continues to grow, we're pushing the animals out of their natural environment. So they don't have anywhere to go. And it's one of the reasons why they're becoming endangered. And then another factor is pollution. Now, some of you, I saw some familiar names here, join me for our other session on plastic and pollution. And we talked about how pollution is harmful to the different animals in the environment. So that's another factor. And then invasive species. And I want to show you some different invasive species which are causing some animals to become extinct. And then there are environmental factors, so natural disasters and climate change. They're all impacting our environment. And let's just look at this picture. Does anyone know what this is, what this plant is called? Does anyone know what it's called? Ooh, some people are raising their hand. Let's see if we have any guesses. And just look at what it's doing to the environment. I laugh at this because I put a map here. Ooh, kazoos. Yes, someone said it. I put a map here because I grew up in the South in the United States, and this was very prevalent, meaning it was everywhere. And it is known as being, I love this, the vine that ate the South. And the reason why is because it's not supposed to be in this environment. It's actually a plant that came from Asia and it was brought to America. And the farmers didn't know what to do. And so they started growing it, and look at it. So if you're driving down highways in the United States in the South, you would actually see this actually taking over. And it would look like this picture where it's covering houses. And this is very true. So the vine that ate the South, I love it, okay? Another one is invasive animals. So while plants can be invasive, so can animals. And they can upset that balance. Remember I said, how do organisms interact well and how are their needs met? Or invasive animals can actually cause problems as well. So this is an example of the red fire ants, okay? And these ants can be if they bite you, they're very stingful, but they also eat young birds, mammals, and reptiles, and they can actually harm or kill them. So this is another example of how invasive species are causing animals and organisms to become extinct, okay? And I just wanted to show you this picture. Is anyone familiar with the rainforest? And so this is a habitat, the rainforest. And there are loads of factors, people, pollution, lack of natural resources, which are causing animals within this ecosystem to become endangered. And look at one of my favorites, the toucans, okay? They're becoming endangered as well because of some of those factors that I talked about. Ooh, and I love that someone said some animals are carnivores, which may cause other factors. And so they're eating their predators, which are causing animals to become extinct. Very good with that, okay? But I just wanted to show you guys some pictures of different animals around the world that are becoming extinct or they're endangered, that these animals may soon disappear. You see the bear, the elephant. Just look at all of those different animals. So what can we do? How do we need to learn more about what I call animal conservation, okay? How can you become superheroes? What can we do? Let's talk about this. So how can we protect our environment and animals from becoming endangered species? So there's two words that I want us to think about. One is conservation, which is protecting our natural environments, maintaining, restoring our habitats. What can we do? What can you do as students? And the word is called a conservationist, okay? So becoming a person who advocates to protect our natural environments. And I've got a special treat for you today. I am joined today by an actual superhero. I call her a superhero. And she's a National Geographic Explorer. She's my special guest today. And in order for her to join me today, she's been on an island for the last 7 weeks off the coast of the UK. And there's no one there. There's no one. She's been doing her research and studying seabirds and different things that are affecting them in their environment. So she had to take a boat just to get on the mainland to join me today. So please welcome a conservationist, Dr. Annette. Hi, Dr. Annette.
Hi, everyone.
How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So Dr. Annette, can you just share with us some of your research, the ecosystems that you study, and what's happening in those ecosystems with seabirds?
Of course. So I'm a seabird biologist and a conservationist, and that means my job is to study seabirds so that we can protect them better. So today I'm going to tell you about seabirds, which are my favorite animals. We're going to talk about the ecosystem and about some of the things I do as a conservationist to learn about them and protect them. But what are seabirds? Let's start with that. So seabirds are fantastic birds which live in the ocean ecosystem. So they're spending most of their lives far at sea in the ocean. And you can find them in every ocean on the planet. There are seabirds everywhere, hundreds of species of seabirds on the planet. For example, in the North Atlantic, you might see the Atlantic puffin. That's the bird on the top left picture here, the brightly colorful bill. If you go further south, in the Southern Ocean, near Antarctica, you will find albatrosses and penguins. But then if you go to more tropical areas like the Indian Ocean, you might find some tropic birds and terns. So all of these birds are spending their lives at sea, and some of them are extremely good travelers. They can fly incredible distances, thousands of kilometers across the oceans, and others cannot fly at all. For example, penguins don't fly, but instead they are excellent swimmers, so they can swim very long distances. Now, because they're in the marine ecosystems, seabirds eat fish. And that's very different from birds that you might see around your house, which might eat insects or seeds or fruit. So seabirds are eating fish. Some will catch it from the surface, so they'll fly above the sea and just pick a fish from the surface, like the tern, the bird on the left here, and it will bring a single fish back to its chick to feed. But some others, like the puffin, for example, have a different strategy. They are excellent swimmers and divers, and they will dive underwater, sometimes tens of meters underwater, and they'll catch lots of fish. Like you see, this bird has at least 10 fish in its beak, and they bring back this big meal of many, many fish to their chick. So that means there's lots of interaction in this ecosystem between the seabirds and the fish that they eat, and they're all part of the same ecosystem. And the way they're related is through what we call a marine food web. Essentially, it's a diagram of all of the things and who eat who. So at the bottom, you have the phytoplankton. And phytoplankton is basically just tiny, tiny plants which form the foundation of this food web. Now, who eats the phytoplankton? Well, very, very small animals called zooplankton. So the zooplankton is then the second level of the marine food web. And then on top of the phytoplankton and the zooplankton, you have the fish. So usually, so this is the zooplankton that appears here, and then we should have the fish appearing, and the little fish are feeding on the zooplankton. Now, what do you think then is at the top? Well, the larger fish, like for example, the tuna or sharks, but also seals, for example, marine mammals, and also seabirds. And these animals at the top are called top marine predators. And you can see here appearing on your screen. So these are top marine predators. That means they are the top of the food chain. But what that means is that this makes seabirds very good indicators of how well the ocean is doing. And we use seabirds as ocean sentinels. And that's because if something in the chain below goes wrong, for example, not enough zooplankton or fish, then the seabirds won't be doing well. So by looking at how the seabirds are doing, we can get an idea of how the marine ecosystem below is doing. And one of the key advantages of studying seabirds to learn about the ocean is that, unlike, say, sharks, they spend a lot of time at sea, but not all the time at sea. They actually come back to land about once a year to breed, and usually on remote islands. And I'm going to show you a few examples of the islands where seabirds breed, and these are called seabird islands. So the first example we're going to look at is very close to my house, actually, in the UK, and it's a very small island called Grassholm. And you can see here in the left picture, it's covered in something white. But if you zoom on the white, you realize it's actually thousands of seabirds. And these birds are called gannets. And there are 40,000 pairs of gannets that have built their nest on this island, very, very close to each other. And this is often what happens in seabird colonies. So colonies is a seabird population on an island, and they are all packed together. So I'm going to ask you guys, can you guess why seabirds tend to build their nests so close to each other like this? Why are they doing this? Any ideas? You can write your thoughts in the chat.
Let's see what some students are saying, Dr. Annette. A lot of students are saying this looks really cool. I love it. And Anna said safety. She believes it's because of safety. And Suzanne said maybe to stay warm.
Good guesses. So in this particular case, they're not staying warm, but this happens further south. For example, penguins will also be very close to each other to stay warm. But someone else said for safety and to protect each other. And that's really true. By being in such large numbers close together, that provides them protection against predators. Now, that's one example of seabirds breeding on top of an island on the rocks. But now we're going to see another example. This is a video that you're going to see that I've taken in the Seychelles on Aldabra Atoll, which is in the Western Indian Ocean. And here there are trees growing with their roots in the water, and these are called mangroves. And here the seabirds are nesting in those trees, and you can see there's loads of birds there, and these are mainly frigate birds. And on that photo on the right, you can see that these big white fluffy chicks, and these are frigate bird chicks that haven't yet left the nest. And so they're standing in these trees, and the parents will come and feed them. Now we're going to see one more example of a seabird island and a different type of nest. And I have another question for you. So this island is Como Island, and this is the island where I was for the last 7 weeks. I've just come off yesterday. And you can see the house where I live here on top of the cliff. And around you just see basically cliffs and grass. Now, if I tell you that in this picture, there are tens of thousands of seabirds on their nest, you might not believe me, but I promise you it's true. So I'm going to ask you to try and guess, where are all these birds that we can't see on this picture? Where are they making their nest? Do you want to have a guess in the chat?
Let's see, let's put our thinking cap, students, and where do we think the birds are by looking at this picture? Some students are saying the cliffs or the caves, okay? Down by the water, some students are saying are the rocks.
Yeah, these are good guesses. You're getting close, but not quite. Oh,
someone said the burrows. I love it. Under the ground, someone said.
Yes, well done. That's correct. These birds are under the ground, and you're going to see soon a picture of me actually looking at a nest under the ground. And I have to use a camera that I put in the nest underground to see where the birds are. And these birds, which are shearwaters and puffins, dig burrows into the ground to build their nest. And that makes it very safe because the predators can't get to the eggs or the chicks. And so on Skomer Island, there are hundreds of thousands of nests. And if you walk around, you can't see them. They're all under your feet. Isn't this extraordinary?
That's so cool. I would have never known that all of the seabirds were underground. So I love it.
I know, it's amazing. And I'm going to show you the next video actually shows you a little Atlantic puffin that brings fish to its chick. And you can see it has fish in its beak and it's running down a hole in the ground to bring food for its baby puffin, which we called a puffling. And so it's running in very quickly because around there are gulls waiting to try and steal the fish. And so it just rushes in. And once it's inside the burrow, it's safe. No one can get to it and it can give food to its chick, which can grow and then leave the nest. Isn't that great? Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I'm actually doing as a conservationist and as a seabird biologist to learn about seabirds. I try to answer lots of questions about seabirds, but one of the main questions I want to understand is why some populations are declining. And to do this, I have to understand what seabirds are doing when they're away at sea and we can't see them. And I want to also understand where they feed and what they feed on. Now, on the left, you can see a picture of me here looking at some seabirds. So when they're on land, I can use my binoculars or my scope and watch them for hours, and it's great. But when they go at sea to find fish, I can't see them anymore. So to study them, I have to use these very little trackers that you can see in my hand on the right-hand side picture, which are called GPS trackers. Now, some of your parents perhaps have a sat nav in their car that they use if they want to drive somewhere new or on their phone. And this is the same technology, but in a very tiny device that I put on the back of the bird, and that records where they're going when they go to find fish at sea. And I've been doing this with the puffins, and I've been trying to understand why some of the puffin populations in the North Atlantic have been declining. And I've used these trackers to find out where they feed. And to understand what was causing these problems, I compared some populations. So remember, we've seen populations are groups of individuals. I've compared populations who were doing well with populations who were doing not well. Some of them were in northern and southern Iceland. Some of them were in Norway, and some of them were on Skomer Island in Wales that I've shown you before. And what we found, you're going to see on the next slide, is basically where these puffins feed. So on this little video, each point of a different color is a different puffin, and it's going out to sea to find food. The island is where the orange dot is right now, and you can see these birds are going out and back in, and they're going really far away actually, sometimes 30 or 40 kilometers. It's a really long trip for a little puffin to fly and back. But what we found when we did this at all these different populations is that the populations which were healthy, so the chicks were growing well, the parents were finding fish very close to the island, so they didn't have to travel very far. But on those populations that are really struggling and the chicks aren't growing very well, the parents had to travel really far away to find fish. And so that means they were very tired, but also they couldn't feed the chick often enough, so they couldn't grow healthy and big. And what that means is there's basically no more fish around the island for these populations. And so it's very difficult for the puffins to find food. Now, next, I also wanted to find out which fish they were eating. Now, to do this, we actually looked at their poop, and you might not guess that, but if if you collect some poop from a bird and you can analyze it in the lab, and then you can identify which species of fish it has eaten. So I did this with puffins. You can see me in Norway. It's very cold. I have a big jacket and I'm collecting some puffin poop. And then you can see some of the samples in the round picture at the bottom. You can see how different they are in colors. That's different birds eating different things. And what we found is actually the same puffins that had to travel very far to feed were also feeding on fish that's not of very good quality. So they had to go very far, and also the fish wasn't very good. In fact, what's happening is that it is climate change that is changing these fish populations around the islands, and that's giving the puffins a hard time. I'm not going to explain right now how this works, but I'm very happy to explain it later after we finish the session. Now, just to finish, I've talked to you about my work on puffins on Skomer Island, but I also work on Aldabra Atoll in the Indian Ocean in the Seychelles. And for this, I'm just going to show you a few pictures and videos to show you what it's like there. So Aldabra Atoll is a really complex ecosystem because it's got lots of different habitats. It's a coral atoll with a lagoon in the middle. So in the lagoon, the water's very calm and they're very flat. And so it's a very good shelter for young animals like young sharks, young turtles, and so on. On the outside, you have the deep ocean where the bigger animals, the bigger sharks and whales and all the turtles live. And then you have the land. On land, you have some beaches where turtles nest, and then some open land where giant tortoises live. You have some mangroves, which we've seen before actually, where the birds nest in the trees and the baby fish shelter in the roots of the trees, which are in the water. And finally, you also have these islets, which are these really big rocks in the middle of the lagoon. And some of the seabirds will build their nest on these islets. And this is the species of seabirds I was studying there. And so I had to go and climb on these islets to study the birds. And the species of seabirds I was studying are called tropic birds. There are two different species on Aldabra. One has a white tail and the other one has a red tail, but otherwise they're very similar. And this is just to show you, look how cute this tiny little chick is. This is a baby white-tailed tropic bird that's only a few days old. And look how cute it is. It's all fluffy and adorable. And in a few months, it will grow to an adult-sized tropic bird. Now, the next video will just show you a little bit what it's like to be on an islet in the lagoon of Aldabra. So this was just me doing some work, and I'm on this islet, so this big rock, and you can see around me, there's this really big lagoon with very beautiful clear waters and all these big islets, rocks everywhere. And on all these islets, you can find some tropic birds breeding. And they breed under the grass and the thick plants because that provides some shelter from the sun, but also from predators. So they're all very well hidden on these islets. And you can see here, there's a little boat coming at the back, and basically the boat was picking me up and driving me to all these different islets. And now we're zooming on a tropic bird nest. So you can see there is a little egg there, which is very well camouflaged. So actually it's quite hard to see it. And I'm just going to put a bird on its egg. I was just studying it. I'm putting it back on the nest. This is a red-tailed tropic bird. And look how beautiful and fierce it is. So as I said, I'm not going into the details of the research I was doing there because I don't really have time. But one of the things I was doing is to look at invasive species. And we've talked about this earlier with the kudzu plants and the ants. So I put some camera traps to look at if there was any effects of invasive species on the nest of tropic birds. Now, these photos are just some pretty photos of nests. You can see a red-tailed tropic bird on its egg, and there was a pair of white-tailed tropic birds with their chick. But what the camera traps recorded at night is that actually there were rats coming to these islets. They're swimming across the lagoon, climbing on the islets. And what we found is that they can eat the eggs of the tropic birds. And that means the tropic birds then can't raise a chick. And this might be one of the many reasons why tropic birds may be declining on this island. So just to conclude, I hope I've convinced you that seabirds are really fascinating animals, and they are unfortunately some of the most endangered birds on the planet. They're declining everywhere, and so to protect them, we really need to learn more about them. And I encourage you, wherever you live, next time you're near the coast, perhaps you already live near the coast, or perhaps you'll go there on holidays or something, have a look for seabirds. wherever you are near the coast, there will be some seabirds around. So have a look around.
Thank you for that, Dr. Annette. That was so interesting. There's so much that I learned about various ecosystems where seabirds live and how it's different from different areas that you've traveled and different islands that you've been on. So that's so great. We have so many questions for you in the chat, and I just want to share a few of those. Someone from American International School asked, how do you connect the GPS on the birds? So how are you able to do that?
So that's a very good question. There's various different methods, but what I do is I have special tape that I use to basically tape the devices to the back of the back feathers of the bird, and it will only be there for a few weeks. So the bird will go out to feed and come back, and when it comes back, I catch the bird again and I take the device off. But if for some reason I can't catch the bird, the device will fall off naturally within a couple of weeks so that the bird doesn't have to carry it for very long. So yes, I'm just using a bit of tape. It's special marine tape that biologists use for animal tracking.
And some other students are asking, so there's tons of questions. Some other students are asking, let me just go to some of the questions. There's so many, and students, I'm going to try to get to all of your questions. Muhammad is asking, how do they survive? And this was at the point where you were talking about some of the predators that were happening. So how do these seabirds survive?
Well, that's a good question. So when they are predators, because they, for example, the tropic birds, you can see they were hidden under this vegetation, so the predators don't get to them all. So some nests fail, but some nests will succeed, and that will be enough to sustain the population. But unfortunately, sometimes the effect is too great. And so there's not enough young chick that are produced to replace the older birds. And that's when you have populations decreasing. And that's where, as conservationists, we try and come up with solutions so we can stop these declines.
Great. I think I have time for 2 more questions right now, guys, and then we'll try to get some more of your questions at the end. Someone asked, great question, Joanna. What is the lifespan of a seabird? Great question.
Well, one of the many reasons why I think seabirds are amazing is that they're really, really, really long-lived. For example, the Manx shearwaters on Skomer, which is the island I showed you where I've just been on, can live for 50 years. So actually, many of the birds I'm studying are older than me. And the record, obviously, is the albatross. The albatross can live for maybe 70 years. So all of these birds are very, very long-lived.
Great job. And let's see another question. How long have you been doing your research? So how long have you been a conservationist and a marine science biologist? How long have you been doing this?
So I have been doing this for approximately 10 to 12 years. I started as a student, and then I developed my research. I did my PhD on seabirds, and now I'm a full-time researcher and seabird biologist. So quite a bit of time.
Yeah. So there's loads of questions, and we're going to stay on, and we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can get. I'm going into the Q&A. I saw this question a few times, so I'm going to make sure we answer this one. What are some of the most common places where you can find a seabird? So, and someone else asked it, what different habitats do seabirds live on?
So a lot of seabirds will be at sea. So for example, if you go on a boat trip, you might be able to see some seabirds around the boat when you're out at sea. But if you want to see them when they're breeding, it's best to go to these islands. And some of these islands we can't reach, but some of these islands you can go as a visitor for the day. You can find them all over. There are seabirds breeding in the Arctic and the Antarctic. There are seabirds breeding near the equator. There are seabirds on pretty much every island around the world. So they're very, very widespread.
These are great questions, students. You guys are just really engaged, and we thank you for that. So what we're going to do, any questions that we haven't answered, if you would like to stay on, we would love for you to stay on. And then what we're going to do is to take all of your questions, and we're going to answer them back and send them to your teachers. So thank you, thank you. I think we are probably right at time. And so thank you for joining us, but we just want to wrap up our lesson for everyone, talk about some of the vocabulary words. So if you have your science notebook, because I have just a little thing for you. Remember, if you joined me last time, we did a cool project. So make sure you keep your notes in your science notebook because you'll need it for the project that you'll do perhaps over your holiday, okay? So our words were ecosystem, and here's your definition for ecosystem. You'll need to know that for the project. And then we talked about various species. We talked about individual, and so did Dr. Annette. A population, which is a group of those organisms or species living in a place. And then all the populations live in a community, and they all make up this ecosystem, okay? And you also learned about endangered species, and thank you, Dr. Annette, for sharing about how seabirds are becoming endangered and how they're having to protect themselves in their natural environment. We also learned a conservationist. So guys, you're going to become a superhero for me, and you're going to learn how to become a conservationist, okay? And if you remembered, I sent everyone just a pre-activity, which is the anticipation guide to do at home or to do with your class, okay? So we've given you the answers to your anticipation guide. So I'm just going to share the correct answers on the screen. If you can pull your anticipation guide up, and here are the correct answers that you have that we've discussed today, okay? Here are all of the correct answers, all right? So thank you for joining us, and I'll just show the rest of the answers to your anticipation guide. So this is just a quiz at the end as we're running out of time, and we want to thank you. And Dr. Annette, do you have anything else to say to the group?
Oh, I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope you find it interesting, and I hope next time you go out, you're going to be looking out for all these really interesting animals, and especially seabirds when you're near the sea.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Students, thank you for joining us and participating in all of the great questions, and we'll take all the questions we didn't answer and we'll send them to your teachers. You guys have a great rest of your day. And for teachers who joined us, just if you want to know a little bit more about the materials and the resources we use for today, we used our Exploring Science series as well as Exploration to help students with their learning today. Have a wonderful day, and as everyone's signing off, thank you so much for joining us for Project Exploration 2.0. Have a great afternoon, everyone.